I'm continuing the ideas I made the video on a few days ago. I have a quilt group here that I want to look at, and you see over this side I have a clamshell 2-row 80 wide, and this is a CSQ pattern that I made, and I'll show you how I did that. Go to get my clamshell, make sure it's set, it's 2 inches high, repeat patterns. I want to tell it that I want the total width to be 80, and I want 2 rows. Put that on the screen. Go down and tell it to alternate it. What I need to do is I want this quilt left to right, and then right to left. To do that, I will select this. I'll use order join, and see it did it very quickly. And then take the top row, this first repeat in the left side, do the same thing, order join. Now, this should quilt left to right, right to left. I'll increase the speed here so it doesn't take forever to go across and back. And yes, it's going to work. I'll just escape out of that. I've already saved it, so I won't save it again. I select both rows, all the repeats in both rows, and I can either right click and tell it to export to CSQ, or I can select them and go to this little car which says export pattern to CSQ, and it'll ask me to save it and give it a name. I already have it, so I'm not going to do it. Cancel. Get out of that. Have my pattern. I'm going to go to another quilt group and go to repeat patterns. Now remember, this pattern is 80 inches wide, and you're going to see it's a little wider than that. If I click on it, it's going to come down here. Let me get out of this, cancel this, click on this pattern. See, it's 84 inches wide. The reason it's a little wider is because it is alternated. I have the pattern selected, repeat patterns, 84 inches wide. I have 2 rows, so that's 4 inches tall. I'm going to make my total height 90 inches. That sounds like a good number. Click OK over here, place all that on the screen. I'm going to go get my geometric square. I have it set for, let me get out of this, get my geometric square so we can see what it is. Have it set for 80 by 16, and I think I'm going to make that 17. I need a little extra room. So I have it set. I'll go to repeat patterns. It's going to place it on the screen in the upper left corner. And what I could do is just move this over so that the machine is lined up with that edge of that second row right there. And then I'll click OK. I'm doing that for a reason, folks. I want to make sure that this is a little bit above that. And since it's a pattern, I can adjust it any way I want it to be adjusted. If I can select it, there it is. I'm going to increase it a tiny bit, like that. I just want to make sure it's clear. Okay, it's a pattern, so I can't use it the way I want to. I will right-click, convert pattern to a boundary. Now, here's what I'm going to do. When I do this, I'm going to quilt these 6 rows. I could quilt probably 8 rows, but I'm going to quilt 6 rows. And then I will do a relocate. Okay. Since this is, in fact, a boundary, we know it's a boundary by this dotted line here. What I want to do with this is get rid of this excess on each side. I'll just select that. I'll do a fill inside. I can use this icon on the right side, or I can just go and tell it to fill inside. It'll do that. Now that first row here, the first 2 rows, it has been chopped off to the edge of the boundary. I need to do that with all of these rows, and then I'm going to pause this and come back. I have all of the extra side pieces have been removed using fill inside. Now let's say that I've quilted these 3 areas here, these 6 rows. Let's say I've quilted those. I'll toggle them as sewn, just pretending that I have quilted them. Now I want this to start with this pattern right here, okay? Because I need this to, remember, this has been quilted. So the next row that needs to be quilted would be this. So I've quilted, I've rolled the quilt, and I'm just going to right click somewhere to get my drop down, and I can use relocate. Shift all to one point. And how it will do this, it says click on a known point. Well, I know that this is the point right here that I want to use. So I'll zoom in so I can see it, turn on the end snap, and it'll snap to that. You can see that it snapped to it. Left click, click yes. You see it has moved everything up into position, and it is in fact ready to quilt the next area here. And I'll quilt, like I said, 3 rows, but first I'll have to do a fill inside. Okay, I have the fill inside all finished. Remember, I did a fill on this row, but I didn't quilt it, and I did that so that I could see this point right there. And let's say I'll quilt these next rows, and I'll do a relocate again. I want to show you something at the bottom of this. It's going to take a little while, and I'm going to pause the video and come back. Many times I see that a problem arises when you get to the bottom of the quilt, and you get down here, you find out that on your last boundary, the bottom edge of the quilt is not close to the bottom of the boundary. So to eliminate that, I always start measuring my quilt, the physical quilt top, and selecting the unstitched rows to see how much pattern is left. So here I'll just select this, get all of these rows, and see how much. It says I have 40.9, so 41 inches left. I would measure from the bottom of this last row, since these kind of sit on top of the next row. I would measure from here all the way down to the bottom of the quilt with the tape measure. You know, have one of those plastic 60-inch long tape measures, and I would measure the quilt from here to the bottom, right there, and I would start adjusting this number to match the physical measurement of the quilt as indicated by the tape measure. The only way to adjust this, if you need to make a correction here, is with this center bottom wedge anchor. If you do anything else, you are not going to adjust the pattern correctly. Only this bottom edge anchor right here in the center of the bottom of what's left. If you change this number right here to match the measurement with your tape measure, it is going to change the size of this pattern in all directions. It will either make it more wide or narrow, and it will also change this top edge. So the only way to do it is with this anchor, bottom wedge center anchor. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and quilt some more, and we'll adjust it when we get to the bottom. Okay, again, I've quilted the area and rolled the quilt, and I have not did the fill inside yet, but I'm going to measure again from the bottom of this last row quilted to the bottom of the pattern, or to the bottom of the quilt actually. Measure this with a tape measure from the bottom of this last row quilted to the bottom of the quilt and see what the measurement is. Then I will match the number over here with the amount of pattern that's remaining. Here I've selected those. I have 28.63, and I will adjust this using this wedge to give me the number that I got when I measured this with the tape measure. Okay, again, I've quilted this area, rolled the quilt, and I'll do my relocate. Shift all to one point here. I'm going to use this end point right there. Everything's been moved, and according to what I have here is I can see that this is going to fit within this boundary, and it's a little bit short here of pattern according to what this is. But now remember, every time I quilt and roll, I delete the old boundary and I make a new boundary. When you get to the end of the quilt, you can have three situations happen. One of three situations. You can either have a space like this that needs to be adjusted, and that space is fairly small. I don't know what my grid size is set on. I'm going to make it 1 inch so I can actually see. You see, that's a little bit there. That's about 3/4 of an inch. But if you change this height over all of these 3/4 of an inch, it probably never would be noticed anyway. But since I have been quilting and rolling and measuring, it will probably never end up like this for me. So you can have this situation. You can have, I'm going to convert this back to a pattern so I can move it. So you could have, like I said, this type of situation when you get to the bottom. Or you can have this happen. I'll make this smaller. You can have part of your pattern down below your boundary. So this would be a boundary, but I'm just simply making it a pattern so I can adjust it. Or if you have carefully measured and rolled your quilt, and what you've done, you've deleted your boundary and drawn a new boundary, and you've drawn a new boundary right along the bottom edge of the quilt. You can end up, if you start measuring and adjusting way up before you get to the bottom of the quilt. Keep adjusting with this arrow the patterns that are left in here. You can end up not needing to make hardly any adjustment in the patterns. You can end up basically with it. You might have an 1/8 of an inch or less, or a little bit more, but you can just select the patterns and you can adjust it. I'll convert this back to a boundary so it doesn't interfere with what I want to do. Now I'm going to take this, select these, and now I can use this wedge arrow and I can move what's left up or down just a slight amount to hit the bottom edge of the boundary. So that's how I do my edge-to-edge quilting. When I get to the bottom, I very rarely have to make a more than an 1/8 of an inch adjustment of these patterns, and this arrow in the center bottom is the only way to do this without changing the entire size of the patterns. Here I'm going to do this example before. Let's say over here I decide I have these selected and it's 14.4 or 16.4, but let's say I need 15.4. I'm going to show you what happens to this thing. You're going to see that it's going to expand in all directions, both to the right, to the left, up. Okay, I'll change this number to 15.4 here. And when I go over here, you see what it's done? It's changed everything. It's shrank my patterns in there. I'll just Control Z and get rid of that. Now it's back to where I need it to be. All I would need to do is do my fill inside on these 3 rows and finish the quilt. So this may give you some ideas, and if so, I wouldn't mind having a comment sent to my email. I don't care, you can do it privately, you can post it on the list, whatever you want to do. So I'll just see you next time on the next free video.